It all feels a bit like Groundhog Day. Back in June, we heard arguments over the lack of a reliable test and trace system.
That just can't be right. That you're telling me you don't actually know how many tests come back within 24 hours and you're in charge of NHS test and trace.
Questions over the government's strategy during the first wave. And pressure on the government to U-turn after a heartfelt campaign from the footballer Marcus Rashford to extend school dinners during the holidays.
We should be looking after families of the vulnerable, most vulnerable, the neediest right now.
Today, much of the same. At this children's charity in Skipton, they're filling the gap after the government refused to extend free school meals this half-term.
It isn't a big need. We feel that the government can well afford this, but it's having to be met by the community. For the government to just not be in touch with reality, eventually that upset turns into pure rage, really. We just need to feed our children, and this is the responsibility of our government.
Mounting public pressure has led to some Conservative MPs conceding today they shouldn't have voted against the Labour motion.
I think I probably would have abstained in reflection, but I think we need to look at how Opposition Day debates are actually conducted. Labour came out with this on the eve of schools breaking up. If they were serious about this, they would have called for it 2 weeks ago, perhaps along a bipartisan approach. We are where we are. We need to recognise that these children today are being affected by this virus and having their education disrupted in a way we've not seen since the Second World War. We need to do everything we can to help. If this works, let's utilise it. And let's plan now for Christmas.
But the government is facing pressure on multiple fronts. A senior Tory backbencher has said it's time for the head of NHS Track and Trace to step down. Dido Harding has been under pressure for months after major flaws in the service.
I do mean this as kindly as possible to her. She's been a tremendous asset. But the test and trace capability clearly needs to move up several gears. And it's what leadership does, not who leadership is, that really matters.
In an interview this morning, the government minister Brandon Lewis said he didn't agree Dido Harding should quit, but he refused to deny the government were thinking of reducing the amount of time you have to self-isolate for if a person in your household tests positive for COVID-19.
As we learn and the scientists are able to gauge this, we can look at whether we're able to reassess that. We're not ready to make a final decision or announcement on that yet, but we want to make sure we're moving with the science and indeed, again, allowing people to live and work within this virus as best as we can, whilst always making sure we protect people's health and the NHS.
The Northern Ireland Secretary also said that the government's position on free school meals was right and that the money they've already given to councils to help those in need should cover this too. But those views are at odds with a growing number of people in the country. More than 2,000 paediatricians have signed a letter to the Prime Minister saying they are shocked by the government's refusal to extend the meals. And today the architect of the campaign tweeted this, showing the swathes of individual businesses and local councils who have now offered free school meals to those in need this half-term. An abundance of goodwill, but one that the government may come to regret didn't come from them.
Well, I've been speaking to the Conservative MP Tim Lawton, who's a former children's minister and who abstained in the vote this week. I began by asking him what he thought the government should do now about the school meals issue.
Well, I want the government to reconsider the decision not to continue the free school meal scheme during the holidays. It was remarkably generous bringing it in Easter, carrying on through Whitsun and summer, but the pandemic is still with us. So therefore, I think to discontinue it now was the wrong decision. I want it certainly brought back for the Christmas holidays.
You were arguing for this before. What was the government saying to you about why they couldn't do it?
The scheme originally was brought in when the schools weren't sitting fully. So I think the thinking was that when the schools did come back properly in September, they wouldn't continue the scheme after that. I think the problem is this has been counterproductive. There's been this huge row over free school meals, which is a sort of simple concept which most people understand, and it's detracted from and taken away from all the other schemes and some really generous schemes, including welfare assistance funding, 63 million that went out just last week to local councils. But this has been completely overshadowed by the free school meal row. So for goodness sake, why not just carry it on for the time being whilst the pandemic is still a problem?
I mean, precisely, there shouldn't be politics in this, and nobody cares about all this sort of criticism of the other side. What they care about is hungry children. But what we've seen from MPs is a load of sort of, well, you know, we're the victims. People are being mean to us, you know, and not talking about the children.
But, Christian, it's not a case of being mean to MPs. When MPs get the sort of abuse that we've seen, which involves death threats, involves members of their family being rung up and abused late at night, when it involves incendiary language, when it involves our offices being vandalized and graffitied all over the place, that is not acceptable. That doesn't help any family who needs support. So for goodness sake, we just need to calm it down.
Of course, but I mean, it's a result of the politicking that has gone on. And nobody cares about all the politicking. You know, what they care about is the vote.
It's a result of a mentality where the deputy leader of the Labour Party calls a backbench Conservative MP making a perfectly reasonable speech, as he's allowed to do, scum. I've been in Parliament for 23 years. I've never seen that sort of language. It's completely unnecessary and shouldn't happen. So rein your neck in, don't do it. Let's see how we can work with the government to see how we can continue the scheme. That is all I'm looking for. But don't trash all the other good things that have happened. The £9.3 billion, as I said, of welfare measures that have already happened, going particularly to those poorest families who absolutely need it. The £180 million of discretionary housing payments and so on. There's some really good stuff that's come out from the government.
None of which is relevant to the hungry children this half term, you know, who are not getting the payments, which is why you support extending it. You know that this is the right thing to do, which is why you wanted it to happen. So there's no point going on about all the other stuff, which may or may not be useful to, you know, particular individuals. But it's irrelevant, is the point. You know,
it's absolutely not irrelevant. What's irrelevant about an extra £20 a week on universal credit that is extended?
Because we're talking about free school meals.
What's irrelevant about £63 million of extra welfare payments to go to food banks, to go to food support and other support?
Because we're talking about hungry children this half term.
What's irrelevant about £180 million for discretionary housing? These are not irrelevant. These are big figures.
They are irrelevant to the question.
We are all getting hung up over free school meals, and we could have avoided that if the government had just carried on its very generous programme, which no government, let alone a Labour government, has ever done before.
But are you not annoyed with your colleagues in government for putting you and other Conservative MPs in this position, whereby your constituents must, you know, are really angry with you?
I'm a bit frustrated, and I think a lot of my colleagues are a bit frustrated because I think this was it was one, predictable, and then secondly, it was an avoidable problem as well, for the sake of a relatively small amount of money over the next holidays. So that's frustrating.